This is Jim Semivan, and you are listening to That UFO Podcast.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to That UFO Podcast. I have a guest with me making his second appearance on the show. I'm delighted to be joined by science editor and head science writer at The Debrief, also a self-professed nerd, published author, and all-round good guy, Chris Plain. Chris, welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me on again, Andy. It's a pleasure.
No, it's good to have you back on. Listen, and we got thrown into a little bit of disarray, didn't we? Minutes before we were due to record, the long delayed, awaited, rumoured, mythed, prophesised about UFO report that was due October 31st has dropped 12th of January 2023. So I think we kind of have to start there, Chris, don't we? We've got to caveat that by saying we've both had one run through of the report. It's pretty limited, as many expected. It covers 12 pages if you open up the PDF, but bearing in mind the first page is the front cover. There's then a table of contents, which is the second page, and then the last few pages are summaries and appendixes.
Yep, glossaries of terms and all of that. Yep.
Yeah, I'm going to say straight off the bat, just looking, and we're talking now half an hour worth of reaction. Online, it seems to be underwhelming or what was expected, depending on what side of the fence you kind of fell down on. Is that fair from what you've seen?
Yeah, I think it's so similar to the first report in the sense that it's like, here's what we're doing, here's our duties, and we've had X number of cases. I think there was over 500 that they reference in this report, and this many have been resolved, this many haven't, or at least categorized into a potentially resolved category. I think that's all pretty perfunctory. I think we're still looking for either, videos, photos, or specific conclusions on things. And I still felt like it was really thin on any of that. Obviously, there was no videos or photos at all. And I do.
Is that realistic, though? Is it to expect photos and videos in one of these reports from the unclassified version anyway? Are we really going to get that?
When they did that, the one press conference on it, and they showed that real brief video or whatever that a lot of people, we all kind of said was garbage. It wasn't much to it. I think maybe some hopes got up, including mine, that we might see something like that. I still feel like, and this was something I was going to discuss regardless of whether the report came out, I still feel like there's been a data bubble that's been building with this, Chris Mellons and these other types coming out constantly indicating that there's better video and better photos and things like that. And none of that leaking out. I mean, really, if you think about the dawn of the debrief and the discussion of the triangle photo, which was 2 years and a month ago, it doesn't really feel like any, at least government captured data, has been released. There hasn't been any yet constant talk of more video and more photos and better photos. And, now since then, Elizondo's credibility has been cast into doubt. A lot of the people that were championing that data have been cast into doubt. So in many ways, we've kind of fallen back into the gray zone that the UFO topic has been in for so long, while at the same time making a lot of progress. We have government offices looking at it, and NASA looking at it, and Avi Loeb type projects. And, there's, in one hand, there feels like there's so much new going on. And in the other hand, when I look at this report today and I look at the summary, I think about the Twining memo from 1947 or Project Sign from 1948, where they're kind of saying the same thing. Like, people are seeing stuff flying around. We can't identify all of it. Some of it may be exhibiting unusual flight characteristics. As a matter of fact, in the last report, I thought we got more detail on that. I thought they broke it down to, if I remember right, there were 21 incidents that were broken down in the last report as potentially displaying anomalous or unusual flight characteristics. And this one just kind of said, there's some of those. So it didn't really even give us a number on that this time.
So I get what you mean with 2022. I think there was a lot of progress and a lot of regression. It seemed at times people like Lou Elizondo, Chris Mellon, and others who had been quite prevalent for a couple of years took a step back. Maybe not in terms of what they're doing, because many would say they're still working hard in the background, still a lot going on. But like you say, I think with a lot of the chatter online, they just decided enough was enough and let's just go back to doing the work in the background. And you can't blame them for some of the heat they got. But like you say, there's then this void, isn't there, of people throwing questions which they don't have to answer, but it kind of left that gap. And I'd like to think they're going to come back in 2023 at some point and make their triumphant return to kind of answer some of those questions, but also help address maybe some of the issues people have, not with them necessarily, but with these reports, the lack of information. I'm sure Chris Mellon, who we can refer to as one of your colleagues because he writes at the Debrief now and again, doesn't he? Chris Mellon, I would love to see one of his articles published on this and what his thoughts are. I'm sure he's had that ready to go and he's just hovering his finger over the enter button just now. And again, to pick up what you mentioned about the report being very much similar to the first report we got in 2021, you've got a Star Wars poster in the background, which many of the YouTube viewers can see the Star Wars poster. For those listening on audio, there's a Star Wars. Is it Revenge of the Sith?
It's actually Revenge of the Jedi, which was the original name of the 1983 movie Return of the Jedi. And these exclusive posters went out to fan club members, which I was back in 1983. And then they changed the title because somebody pointed out to George Lucas that Jedis are good guys and they don't get revenge. So they ended up changing it to Return of the Jedi. So yes, it's a limited edition collectible poster. One of the few limited edition anythings I own.
Nice. I love that. And dropping movie bombs on here, I like that. What it reminded me of, though, is many people said that Episode 7, A Force Awakens, the newer trilogy, was just a repeat of A New Hope. And it was very similar, almost a remake. And I think the report, to bring it back to UFOs, it seems like they've retread that ground. And the new team that's been involved in making the new report, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick and others, they've had to come in and start from square one. So as much as the report that came out in 2021 in June, like you say, probably had a bit more information, and maybe we're thinking of that extra stuff that got released through John Greenwald and others in their FOIA requests, that these guys have had to go again and go, okay, here's what we have managed to put for the groundwork. And as they say within the report, going forward, quarterly, there will be the updates. Again, you can't guarantee what kind of quality is going to come from those. You mentioned numbers. Some of the numbers that are in this report is that there are 366 reports or incidents being reported since the last report. Some of those are actually predating the June 2021 report, but they weren't included in that report at the time, so they could be before then. So overall, that means since these reports were asked to be made, there's over 510, or a total of 366 in the new one. We don't see any information really at all on those, other than of those reports that 53% are characterised as unremarkable. They don't really then talk about the 47% that would be remarkable because they're it's not unfair to say, is it? But again, that's not to say that's not remarkable Chinese drones or remarkable Russian drones or remarkable US tech that's accidentally been discovered by its own Air Force or Navy. But there's still that potential that there's some interesting stuff in there. Is it likely that's what's then going to be in the classified version of this report? They get to see some of that more interesting stuff.
That would be my guess. That would be the key difference between the unclassified and classified versions. And again, this is not exactly my area of expertise, but I've already been in the chat with Tim McMillan and Micah Hanks and the rest of the Debrief crew since this report came out. And that is the impression I get. That also they mentioned airborne clutter, and Tim thought that the way they worded it, and again, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but we were just discussing this before I came on air, that those might represent electronic signal gathering, electronic intelligence, or yeah, exactly. He called it massent, sort of gathering. So I think that's the stuff that they're always going to get in the classified report that we don't get is, here's the advanced sensors or the advanced detection equipment that the military doesn't want to disclose that they're using to gather data on potential enemy military platforms or
Yeah.
whatever, and that it's picking this sort of stuff up. So that would be my main guess, would be, yeah, they're getting more detail on the 47%, and then more detail on the advanced sensors and advanced systems that are being used. And the thing I always point out to people, I say, as a science writer, I write on amazing things that are done civilian wise. For instance, I wrote one story about a team from MIT using high energy particles to scan the inside of the pyramid and the Great Pyramid of Giza. And the reason that's applicable, I think, in this situation is there are ways that science people sit around and think about using information that's available that just other people don't think about. So if you think of the massive budgets we pour into this stuff in the U.S. and into our military, God only knows what some of those sensors do. God only knows what some of the systems. I mean, you can guesstimate more advanced types of underwater detection and sonar grids or things like that. But there are ways to detect information that are would probably reveal a significant amount about the nature of UAP, that would give a lot more information because of these advanced data collection. So I think that's the stuff people would get in the classified reports. I unfortunately think it might be something for the history books as far as, ever finding out what that sort of data is and what those tools are. People often talk about the U.S. revealing the stealth fighter and the stealth bomber during the Gulf War, and that kind of being the last. That's 30 years ago, and that's the last time we really got a. Hey, here's a really cool secret military technology we've been working on for 30 years, and we're going to let you all see it. And it's
Yeah.
not something we get very often. And if anything, with the rise of China and with the issues with the Russia now, I think we're less likely than ever to be told, "Hey, here's the really cool toys we have, and here's the type of data they collect."
I think the rise of China was Star Wars Episode 8's
Yes,
working
exactly.
title
Rise of
before they
China.
changed
Yep.
it. Yeah, yeah. What was interesting from the report, and I suppose this is me, forgive me, folks, that I'm really scraping the barrel here for interesting being the word, but they do list the number of agents. They name the agencies that have been involved in the data collection, including the DIA, the NRO, the NGA, the NSA, NASA, the Department of Energy, and many, many more. Some of those obviously stand out. And like when you mention those sensors, you see things like geospatial sensors, and you talk about why some of these can't be discussed. I remember speaking to Gary Voorhees, Patrick Hughes, and Kevin Day, and they mentioned in terms of the Nimitz Princeton incident in 2004 that there was an organization on the coast which has sensors that are looking for essentially missiles coming in and approaching the US coastline that picked up the tic tacs. So again, that's not something they're going to come out though and say,
Yep.
"Oh yeah, we'll give you our information while we're looking for ballistic intercontinental missiles that could hit the US and how we detect those and what we might have." So that kind of stuff is never going to come out, but it's interesting. Those organizations, how much input they had is also up for debate, because it could literally be Sean Kirkpatrick sending an email to someone at NASA and NASA sending back a zip file saying, "Here you go, here's some stuff I've got, have a look through it." And then that's part of the study. However, it could be a lot more than that. We just don't know. So it's interesting and at least encouraging to see that all these organizations are involved and they are being looked at. But for Sean Kirkpatrick and co, it's been about 6 months. It's a lot to ask them to put together a
Yep.
huge portfolio with all that information. And I'll go back to 2021 when we knew a report was coming the first time. People like Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon sat on mainstream news platforms telling people that it wasn't enough time, 6 months or a year
Yep.
wasn't enough time to put together a comprehensive report. It had to be 2 or 3 or 4 years. to really put together something meaty, something that Congress and others could get their teeth into. So people have to bear that in mind as well, that while it seems that we've went back to square one,
Yeah. Well,
it's the quarterly reports coming that could see a little bit more.
I do think that that's the potential good news here is, I mentioned earlier the Twining memo and Project Sign, that led to Grudge and led to Blue Book. And if you look at that arc, excuse me, that was the first effort was almost informal. It was just, hey, these guys went to General Twining and said, get a bunch of science nerds together and figure out what people are seeing in the air. And they came back and said, yeah, stuff is being seen. It's if I remember the terminology used in that memo was, it's not fictitious or visionary, but it's a real phenomenon, is exhibiting anomalous flight characteristics, and in many ways similar to that June 2021 report that kind of just acknowledged, okay, there's enough here to go ahead and move forward and have an official program. So now we have the official program, AARO, and AARO's doing their chapter one. They're going, all right, this is now the official effort. Here's our first chapter. And it references the 2021 and it references the original incidents. And then it says, here's all the new ones we've looked at since. But in many ways, the report is, here's our definition of terms. It was almost like a legal document in that way.
Yeah.
Here's the glossary of terms. As you said, here's the platforms that contributed, or the organizations that contributed information. I don't think we saw the U.S. Air Force in there, did we?
Actually, one of the mentions of the Air Force was that it was mainly reports from Navy and Air Force aviators and operators. So they're mentioned in terms of the reporting and where the reports are coming from.
Yeah, so those would most likely be like pilot reports then?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're still, what's interesting, Chris Mellon, you referenced, he wrote a piece for the Debrief a few months back asking where is the Air Force on this issue. And what he went into in that piece was all the different types of technology and systems available, satellite systems, advanced radar systems, and everything that the Air Force specifically has to have domain dominance, to have full information dominance of aerospace just at the edge of the atmosphere and all the way down to ground level, and everything they have these. And the point he made was how much they dwarf the capabilities of the Navy. That the Navy has a bunch of great technology and has their own aviators and has to monitor the skies as well, but they're a significant fraction of the capabilities are not the eyes of an Air Force pilot going, hey, I saw something weird flying around. That's worth categorizing and grabbing. But the follow-up to that, the going back to the Air Force, and as you said, saying, what did our missile launch analysis system see? What did our satellites see? What did our advanced electronic intelligence sensors see? So I still think that one still gets the feeling that the group most equipped to discuss this and to really feed information to this office is still not doing that. At least that's the impression I get. So yeah, as you said, maybe some pilot reports. But yeah, my initial reaction is you've still got, the people who we're asking all the general practitioners if it's cancer, but the oncologist still isn't chiming in, right? And that's their area of expertise. Yeah. So in this particular case, it still feels like, for whatever reason, the Air Force is not participating, at least at a higher up level. I do think it's particularly encouraging the groups you pointed out, the NOAA and NASA and these other ones, are providing the information they have. But again, that feels like more general practitioners. That feels like more people say, we got a little bit of data over here, we got a little bit of data over there. But the main group that one would really want to hear from, that is their area to patrol and defend, theoretically, are not participating. So that's the thing that jumps out to me. I would also say that, and just reiterate my initial point, which is it feels like this is their chapter one. That the 2021 was like a triage. Hey, yes, we definitely have a damaged patient here. Let's get him in. And then the preliminary assessment actually done by the new group, as you've pointed out, and a lot of people pointed out, not a lot of time to do it, not a very big group to do it. One can be hopeful that at least it's being taken seriously, that the report did actually finally come out. I think that's significant in and of itself. And that, yeah, they're listing incidents and they're still saying 47% we don't know what they are. And a huge, at least some percentage of these, I think they again mention anomalous or unconventional flight characteristics. That's still in this report. That hasn't been weeded out yet.
Well, Chris, we've went over it as literally as it's dropped. We've not had a long time to look at it, and a lot of dust will settle. No doubt people will find particular wording that may or may not have changed or something that was interesting within it. So we'll look forward to that happening over the coming days. I'll be doing a breakdown with Dan in the coming days as well, or it's already out depending when folks hear this. Like you say, one positive is that it's finally came out. We waited for it for the last 2 months of 2022. It caused a bit of infighting with some folks online and whatnot, as you can expect with the old interweb these days. But here we are in 2023. So at least that's a positive to kind of kick off 2023. That the report's here, it's out, and we can move forward looking onto those quarterly reports. I finished 2022 recording with your colleague Micah Hanks, and we looked at the year in review through different debrief articles. It was really interesting. So I want to ask you first, before we look at 2023, Chris, what were some of your highlights of the past year?
I'll do that. Let me just jump in here real quick because you mentioned you're going to be going through this report with people. What'd you say, Dr. Clark? I think you're going to be going through it.
Oh no, with Dan Zetterstrom,
with
who
Dan
comes on for analysis.
So towards that end, and I mentioned this to you privately already, but the Debrief is going to be doing a UFO roundtable next week. And it's something we've talked about doing for a while. We thought the report wouldn't be out by then, so one of the things we were going to cover is why is it's delayed and what's going on as well. But this is just a good time to sneak in and let you know that, and let your audience know that I believe next Thursday, so essentially a week from today, around I think at 10:11 a.m. Pacific time, so about 2 Eastern here in the States. We'll be jumping on. I'll have Micah on. I'll have Tim McMillan on. I'll have Chrissy Newton on. And she's got lots of interesting stuff about Jacques Vallée's new book and Elizondo's book and James Fox's movie he's working on. Micah has a lot, and I think that's what you just were kind of leading towards, was stuff that the Debrief has covered in the last year, which was, FAA and AIAA and other organizations kind of getting involved in the process of, at minimum, pilots having a way to report incidents that they're coming across, and civilians and military both having a way. So that's something we're going to do next week, and hopefully by then there'll be a little more clarity on this report and where things are going. I know Micah was working, there should be a feature coming out in the Debrief here in the next couple hours, and he was working on this for weeks now in anticipation of the report coming out. So I can tell you that he's got a big feature on this new report. He's been reaching out to DOD and I believe Mellon and Elizondo and some of these people too. So hopefully we have some tasty quotes to serve the people from the Debrief. As far as last year, we really got our footing at the Debrief in a very interesting way. Our numbers are up, and the performance of the site in and of itself, and we found a really interesting process has taken place where the science side and the UFO side have started to meet each other in the middle a lot. And I tell people this all the time. I say, I write a lot of articles about the search for life in the cosmos, or whether it's habitable exoplanets or search for life in the clouds of Venus or things like that. but as well as technosignatures, the actual search for intelligent life with engineering and equipment. And one of the big highlights, one of the things that came out right here at the end of the year, was my piece on the group using the LIGO telescope to look for warp trails. Do you mind if I jump into that real quick?
No, that was going to be my first one anyway.
Okay, so yeah, I think this is really significant, and this has the opportunity. I spoke to one of the lead researchers literally again yesterday about it because they're working on their follow-up paper. But for your listeners, in short, this is what's going on. So way back in 1916, Albert Einstein predicted that there would be something called gravitational waves, that things that were large enough, had enough mass, or things that were warping space-time, like a warp drive, although he wasn't thinking about warp drives in 1916, would warp space-time, and we should be able to detect that using the right equipment, we should be able to detect that. It took 100 years. It wasn't until 2015 that this pair of lasers, it's called the laser interferometer, I forget what GO stands for. O is observatory, a gravitational observatory. So they have this laser all the way up in the northeast or northwestern corner of the U.S. in Washington. They have one all the way down in southeast in Louisiana, and they can point those at objects in space, and by measuring differences and changes between those, in 2015, they confirmed exactly what Einstein predicted 100 years, or in that case, 99 years earlier, that gravitational waves are a thing. And they did it by looking at two black holes crashing into each other. So a place where gravity was so extreme, it's like, okay, if we're going to pick it up, we're going to pick it up here. But that actually won the researchers the Nobel Prize. I mean, it was a really, in physics, it was a really, really huge discovery. And the reason it's significant for the search for extraterrestrial life, and in particular, the search for technosignatures like alien spacecraft, is because it's a brand new tool that seems perfectly equipped to do this particular type of search. And the reason is this. So the guy I spoke to is a guy named Johnny Martyr. He's runs a group called out of Sweden called Applied Physics, and they're like a Bell Labs. They're a think tank that has over 30 physicists that work there, and what they do is they analyze technologies for venture capital firms and things like that, and determine the viability. But one of the things Johnny, the founder, and his partner Alexei Bobrik did a year ago is they put out a paper on what they called a physical warp drive. I know I'm giving you a lot of background here, but this is going to... No. They put out a paper on something called a physical warp drive. And basically, their goal was to take the theoretical warp drive that people like Sonny White or Miguel Alcubierre or some of these more famous mathematicians put together and say, what would it take to build a real one? Like a physical is the term Johnny uses with me all the time, a physical warp drive. And they came up with a design that works, at least from a mathematical and theoretical standpoint, but also doesn't require any of the exotic matter or negative energy. It doesn't have any of the what he calls the energy violations. So it's a sound plan, if we have the engineering know-how, to build a warp spacecraft, and in particular, a sound plan on how any civilization, whether they're on another planet or here on Earth, would build one, because the physics constrain the way, as he pointed out, whether if there was water on Mars 2 billion years ago and you had a boat on Mars, it would be shaped like boats on Earth, because water is water, and traveling through water would have to be done with the shape of a boat. You wouldn't have a square boat or a boat that's a bunch of sticks. It would be shaped like a boat hull. So, and the physics constrains that. So after they put out their warp drive paper, they went about doing their business and living their life, and a few months ago, they got contacted by these two researchers from CERN, and one of them is the Associate Dean of Physics at Carnegie Mellon University. So, people that know Chris Mellon and know that family name, that's as prestigious a university as there is in the U.S., Carnegie Mellon. And so these really high up researchers that work on the CERN, super collider, they reached out to Johnny and said, "Hey, we were reading your paper about the physical warp drive, and it occurred to us that if some civilization was using this type of warp drive, that we could detect it with LIGO, that the LIGO observatory run by MIT and Caltech would actually pick it up and pick up the warp trail in space, and this equipment we have would probably be strong. Have you ever thought about doing that?" And he was like, "No, actually, we haven't thought about that, but they reached out to the people at LIGO, and they've been working behind the scenes and have had positive reception, and that's what they're in the process of doing now." I can only say so much, but the point is they had a paper come out, and they have a part 2 paper and a part 3 paper showing the work that they're doing. The data at LIGO, a lot of it is captured and stored. So they don't even need to go in and say, "Hey, will you point the telescope here or will you point it there?" They can just go in and dig through the recorded data and look for the signs, for the telltale signs of a warp signature or a warp spacecraft in that data across the entire Milky Way. So as opposed to SETI, who's looking for radio waves or EM emissions in one little location in space at a time, they got to point all the telescopes there and record the data and say, "Did we see a radio transmission?" This has the ability to scan massive areas, and if there are these telltale signatures of a warp drive, they believe they will pick it up. They're actively going through that data now. And the reason that's so exciting is because it's brand new. We didn't, that paper, that Nobel Prize was in 2017. The research was in 2015. It was published in 2016, and the paper was 2017. So the ability to even use that tool and to look for something like this is a brand new ability. It's a brand new hunt for technosignatures tool and system. And the people that are talking to me about it, that are doing it, are legit, high-end, extremely reputable scientists. As I said, the one guy from Carnegie Mellon, the other guy runs this massive think tank. And they just happened to reach out to me to tell me about it because I wrote a paper on their warp theory a year and a half ago. And he says, "I don't know if you'd be interested in this." And of course, obviously I did a whole feature on it, and we've had multiple talks with them. And he won't give me anything concrete yet, but he keeps teasing the possibility to me that when their next paper comes out sometime in the spring, that they're feeling like they might have some positive results. And the one thing I will add to this, and the example he used that I put in the article, was imagine you're looking at a lake from overhead. You're looking down at a cool, clear lake, and all of a sudden a boat goes by, and a swimmer goes by, and then a jet ski goes by. They're going to leave patterns in the water. They're going to leave a wake pattern behind them in the water that is water waves as opposed to gravitational waves. But using artificial intelligence and machine learning, and with enough experience, you could look at that and just look at the wake pattern and go, that was the boat, that was the swimmer, and that was the jet ski, without actually seeing the boat, the swimmer, the jet ski, but just the wake pattern they leave. So that's the exact way they're going to be looking, or are currently looking, for the telltale signs of either a massive spacecraft, like they term their thing Ramadar because of Arthur C. Clarke's Rendezvous with Rama, which had this massive spacecraft that's so big, even if it's traveling 5-10% the speed of light, it would create a gravitational wave behind it because of its size. Well, if you have a little ship, relatively little, like the Starship Enterprise, and it can go warp factor 2, warp factor 3, and it's using a physical warp drive, it's going to leave a wake pattern behind itself in gravitational waves. So basically, we've been looking for technosignatures with SETI for 60 years and haven't picked them up. This is a whole new tool to not just look for radio emissions, but to really to look for, hey, is there a civilization out there using warp drive? Are they zooming around the stars with the warp drive spacecraft? And if so, they feel like they're going to pick them up.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating, and that's the way I thought of it, was the wake of a boat. The ripples in the water. Is that's what we're going to be able to actually pick up now from these craft. It's like we have Jurassic Park when they've got the water to pick up the T-Rex. We've now got the cup of water that we didn't have before. And I wonder though, we've got this capability now that we are looking out into the Milky Way, and objects like Oumuamua that may have come past, we can go in and dig into the records and pick up where their gravitational waves detected. How close to home then do you have any idea could that technology work?
Oh,
And I'm thinking, if there was a Phoenix Lights event, could you point those lasers over Phoenix and check if there was gravitational waves left behind?
my understanding is it's outside the atmosphere. So if it were a Phoenix Lights or something like that, which is within the atmosphere, that they're looking for the ability of these two lasers. But he did say as close as the moon in one part of our conversations, which is 220,000 miles, not that far away at all. So, in astronomical terms, so the space station is 22,000 miles out. So it's about, I'm sorry, the farthest geostationary satellite. The space station's
Yeah.
about 220 miles out. So about 10% of the way to the moon is where our farthest satellites regularly circle. So astronomically close. As far as looking for something right in the atmosphere, that's a good question. That's something I will ask him. I do know that he's working on some other features for us as well, and giving me some input on some other. I mentioned to you there was a very high profile UFO event in Chicago at the O'Hare Airport back in 2006. And he has some really interesting thoughts on what people saw there and what could be a very realistic explanation. And
Can you summarise, though, because some listeners might not be aware of what the Chicago O'Hare
sure.
incident is? Just give us a brief
So
summary.
there was my understanding of the incident. It's not something I'm super expert on, but I've discussed it with Micah Hanks to get a little more tuned up. Basically, people saw out over the runways. They started getting calls up to the tower saying, "Hey, we're seeing something hover over one of the runways," and it was a massive disc-shaped object that looked like a classical bump on the top UFO disc sitting over the runway. And initial reports were even that there was a picture taken or pictures taken by
Yeah.
some ground crew that were working on around some of the airplanes. That, again, like a lot of these things, has never surfaced, and there's never been confirmation of it. But then, so people were seeing it. They got number reports, pilot reports, crew reports, civilian reports. So there was this kind of sudden, are you guys seeing that moment? And then a huge percentage of the reports, said that the disc object suddenly shot straight up into the sky, and like a Wile E. Coyote running through the wall, left a perfect circular hole in the dense cloud cover over Chicago,
Yeah.
and right where it had shot through. So it's an anecdotal, observation only UFO event. There's no radar. There's no photos or anything we know of other than the allegations of some photos, but it was a huge event that had tons of tons of people react to it, and it had a lot of witnesses. So it wasn't one of these, two guys out on a highway saw something. This was over a big city airport, and a very defined craft according to people that saw it. And then, yeah, it shot straight up and shot through the clouds, almost like the
Daylight.
Calvin object, right? Without the cloud part.
Yes. Yeah, and it was daylight as well, daytime. It was, like you say, loads of witnesses. Airport, I believe they shut the runway, shut the airport for a short
Yep.
time. So, Chris, obviously the article is due to come out. Have you got a rough date yet for release?
Yeah, I would say the end of the month. So we're only a couple of weeks away. But yeah, I don't want to come out and say definitively there's new evidence on that case, but there's a new analysis of that case that may include some new evidence that has an interesting conclusion. And again, this is from a physics think tank. That's that same group when I was working with them on their gravitational wave and looking for warp spacecraft. He said, I'd like to share something interesting with you since you guys do cover UAPs and UFOs. And by the way, something he's very interested in as well. So I tell people all the time, this is the dirty little secret among scientists, is that they're all interested in UFOs, and they all, the only time I've ever gotten resistance on it is people specifically, like maybe an astrobiologist or two, who their job is they're trying to find microbes on Mars, and they get frustrated when they hear people trying to jump to the end of the book and go, well, what about the alien spacecraft hanging out by the moon? So that's the only, but even astronomers, astrophysicists, a lot of people that work in this area, it's something they're very interested in. And so, he's particularly interested in that Chicago O'Hare incident, and has told me some pretty interesting things about it, is providing me some new information. And I would say the last week of January, I'll be putting out a feature about some thoughts and some ideas and maybe some new evidence regarding the Chicago O'Hare UFO incident. So, and it's good. It's not it's not all right. He's looked at it and he thinks it was a weather balloon. We'll leave it at
Sure.
that. So,
I mean, it could be a weather balloon just from a different planet, but yeah, that goes without saying,
Yep. And I tell people all the time, since you went there, I do think that it's very interesting to note that scientists in particular and people that look for this is where everything is shifted. Bill Nelson at NASA said, when asked about UFOs, he said, well, this is what we do at NASA. We look for alien life, so why wouldn't we look at UFOs? And that's a major shift. I tell people all the time, I say, when I grew up in the 70s and the 80s, NASA was a space exploration organization. There may have been somewhere in the charter, there may have been, hey, if you run into aliens, go ahead and report it. But it wasn't expressly what they're looking for. But what they found is that not only is it something the public's more interested in, but it's something their scientists are more interested in. So when the James Webb went up, everybody didn't go, hey, great, is the James Webb telescope going to find us some new Crab Nebula, or going to find us a distant galaxy? No, everyone's going, hey, is that thing going to spot technosignatures or biosignatures around another Earth-like planet? So that shift is real. That shift is tangible. NASA and the European Space Agency and groups like that, there is a massive internal shift towards, hey, let's look for alien life. Because it seems so far-fetched, even in the 70s, 80s, before the first exoplanets were found. And I tell people all the time, there was I was 26 years old when the first exoplanet was discovered. And I was past my college education. And during that time, taking astronomy classes at UCLA, I had professors that were 100% sure there would be no planets around other stars. That our solar system was, and these are highly credentialed. UCLA is not an easy school to get into, much less get a job teaching it. And they were sure of it. They were like, don't even fantasize about that. It doesn't exist. And then I had other professors that would say, even if they do exist, we're not going to find rocky planets like Earth. They're probably extremely rare. They're not going to be the size of Earth, and they're not going to be in the habitable zone where they could have water on the surface, which is the right distance from their host star to have water. Well, guess what? That's what we find all the time now. I literally put out an article today about another Earth-sized, and is about 95% the size of Earth, rocky planet around a cool M-dwarf star about 100 light years away that's in the habitable zone. And guess what? There's 3 other planets in that system. At least 2 of them are rocky planets, and at least one of those, which is about 90% the size of Earth, is in the habitable zone. So just the idea of looking for life on Mars, looking for life in the clouds of Venus, but much further looking for intelligent life, looking for societies on other planets and technological societies, is just something that modern day scientists take for granted. They are just actively now looking for that. So it seems so far-fetched even 20, 30, 40 years ago, and now it's just something that they're like, oh no, that's what we do. As Bill Nelson said, oh, that's what NASA does. Why wouldn't we look for life? Well, that wasn't what NASA was doing in the 70s and 80s when I was growing up, and they were particularly resistant to talking about life on other planets. Now they employ astrobiologists, people whose job it is to look at environments on other planets and say, would this be a good place for life, at least as we know it, you know? So that's massive, massive shift. And again, it doesn't get into transdimensional or time travel or some of the other more fantastical theories that people are excited about for possible explanation of UFOs, none of which I completely dismiss. But I do think it's important to note that when they were talking about flying saucers from another planet in 1947, they didn't know there were other planets. They didn't know they would be Earth-sized or in the habitable zone, and they didn't know that they would be everywhere. Everywhere we point telescopes to look for planets, we find them.
I wonder, are some of these scientists and the changes in the views, these were kids who were brought up on the Star Trek series in the 60s, the 70s, the Star Wars movies, and now we're getting the benefits of kids whose maybe imaginations were sparked and inspired by exploring planets on the Enterprise, and, you know, William Shatner and Patrick Stewart and these guys that they grew up with, so they've taken that into their adulthood.
That's no more statement you have said has ever been more true than that, Andy. That we have an entire generation of scientists, or now multiple generations of scientists, who were raised on forward-looking science fiction and who are looking at it, and I report on it every day. We're building laser beam weapons. We're building, all kinds of tractor beams, all kinds of stuff that you saw in science fiction that would directly inspired researchers, that have directly inspired researchers to say, hey, can we make a warp drive? Not because it was something they sat around thinking about on their own, but because they were watching Star Trek and went, hey, warp drive, I wonder if we could build that. A transporter, I wonder if we could build that. There's research into traveling by wormholes. I guarantee people that research traveling by wormholes watch Stargate, whether they admit it or not, right? Because people are traveling by wormholes there. So we have more scientists than we've ever had just by the sheer size of the Earth's population. We have a much broader base of people because of diversity now in those sort of STEM programs. So we have just a whole wider range of perspectives. It's not just nerdy white guys with calculators and glasses. And we have so many more tools and data. And every time we find more information, it seems to increase the chances for life, not decrease it. We find more planets, more habitable zone planets. We found extremophiles here on Earth, life forms that live without sunlight or in extreme environments. So the science and the body of human knowledge scientifically continues to grow towards Earth is not extraordinary in this sense, but Earth is ordinary. I always tell people I think it's funny that scientists aren't more embracing of UFOs or the idea of alien either craft or probes coming here, because that would be consistent with the materialist point of view. The magical thinking point of view would say, oh no, Earth is the only place with life because God made us the center of the universe and there's nothing like this anywhere. The materialist view, which most scientists, the God is dead view, would be exactly that, yeah, there should be life everywhere because the same elements that Earth are made of are everywhere. We spot water around planets in the atmospheres of planets all the time. We spot carbon dioxide. It's all made of the same stuff. I tell people all the time, imagine you lived in a garden and there were plants all around you and you found out there are gardens everywhere. What are the odds that none of those gardens have plants? They have the same dirt, they have the same water, they have the same sunlight. So the idea that life is not only common in the cosmos, but potentially prevalent, potentially at a very high rate, and that it is, on the grand scheme of time, if we're just, launched into space, really in my lifetime, I tell people all the time, we walked on the moon 26 days after I was born, and I'm not that old. I'm 53. I'm not ancient yet. And so just in my lifetime, we've seen so much progress. Are we to believe that if the cosmos is 13.8 billion years old and we're 4.4, whatever we are, that in the 9 billion years leading up to Earth, that societies maybe haven't even come and gone? I mean, when George Lucas said a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, I think that's something people would think about now. It wouldn't seem fantastical at all to go, societies may have come and gone billions of times across the cosmos, much less exist with us concurrently or contemporaneously, or much less send probes here to see what we're doing, or maybe even fly here if they have the ability to exceed the speed of light.
One more thing I want to mention on the Chicago O'Hare incident that really interests me and why this event still excites me. It's not a Roswell, which I've said many times. The people involved have passed on. Their grandchildren have passed on. The records will be few and far between. The technology was minimal for the time as well. And it's really one of those that's being anecdotal and consigned to history until such time we find out the truth and a government comes out and says, here's the documents.
Yep.
Chicago O'Hare was 2005. That's not long ago. We had, I'm right, in 2005, yeah?
I think 2006.
2006. It's within, the last 20 years, and the technology was good. The satellites would have been good. The radar would have been good. The military technology that would be protecting the United States would be good. And would it have taken much at the time, or even now, to go back and say, on this date, at this time, what do we have for the Chicago area? What did we pick up entering the atmosphere? What did we pick up leaving? That's something that I'm sure at the time and on the day, there would be decent evidence for.
And to bring it full circle to the new report that came out today, the AARO report, I think that's what people are looking for. I think that's what we want to see. We want to see them say, okay, we've looked at Chicago in 2006 or the Nimitz incident in 2004, and we've reached out to the Air Force and said, what satellites did you have pointed in that area? And we reached out to other organizations and said, what sensor systems did you have looking at that area? What did you see there? And Chicago is a perfect example because it's smack dab in the middle of the continental United States and in the Midwest, and is somewhere where we should have tons of coverage, from weather satellites to military satellites to sensor systems on the ground to aerial platforms flying around, AWACS systems, things like that, radar, sonar, and things as we pointed out, that we don't know about. There should be data. There should be the ability by an AARO to go back to an incident like that and say, all right, we've narrowed it down to this date and this time and this location. Start reaching out to organizations and saying, what do you have? Do you have anything from that date and that time? Maybe a weather satellite picked up some weird electromagnetic anomaly there at the time, and it points towards it was an atmospheric event. Or who knows? It doesn't have to, this is where we get into this military secrecy issue and gets people so frustrated because it feels like it's something we should be very, very easily able to do. We should be able to go back, pick a date and time, and say, what do we have on file electronically? What was recorded at that date and that time and that location from all these different organizations that have observations in that area?
Well, Chris, just before we finish up, I've got a couple more things I just want to touch on. One of the listeners, Ryan, he asks, have you got any thoughts on Neuralink, founded by Elon Musk? And what made me think this was particularly relevant, one, you're obviously a science guy in technology, but Danny Sheehan's comments on Coast to Coast about there potentially having been a helmet recovered in a crash retrieval that helped telepathically pilot one of these craft. And that's the kind of technology that 10, 15, 20 years ago would have sounded like still science fiction, but we're getting close to actually having that sort of tech, aren't we?
Oh, I just wrote an article a few months ago. Neuralink is evasive. It's something that they jam the probe down into your brain, right? But I was writing about this group that developed a helmet to let tetraplegic, so people that really can't even move their shoulders or most of their neck or anything, but they can think about it. They put a helmet on them, connect the thing to their wheelchair, use some artificial intelligence software, and there's actually video on the Debrief's YouTube channel. You can see this guy. It's from his point of view, but he's driving through an obstacle course, his wheelchair, using his brain. And that's just, again, an external helmet, not a probe stuck down into your brain like Elon Musk is doing. I think it's historically significant. There's a Clint Eastwood movie from the 80s. I can't remember the name of it, but he's flying a Russian airplane that has been designed to be controlled that way. He has a helmet on, and he's flying the plane, and you control it with your thoughts. That became part of UFO lore when Philip Corso, put out the book The Day After Roswell. And they talked about something about that, about potentially this like strap they would wear around their head and use it to control the spaceship, I guess, control the saucer, whatever may or may not have crashed there. So yeah, I think we went from, again, something that appeared in science fiction, appeared as like, oh, that's a cool idea, to, I have doubts on Corso's claims, but nonetheless was something that was being talked about even 30 years ago. And now is something we're doing, something that Elon Musk has monkeys playing Pong with the Neuralink. We have that video on the YouTube as well. So not only do I think it's, do I think that we have a crash saucer that they had a helmet and that's what they were using, or a crash ship? I don't know how it, I have no idea. But I can tell you that, again, it's a technology associated with the mythos of UFOs that is real. It is something that we are working on now. I wrote about Johns Hopkins University a year ago. They connected a guy to like a Neuralink type device. Again, he had no movement of his arms or legs, and he was able to control robotic arms, pick up a knife, put a Twinkie on a plate, cut a piece of it off, stick the fork into it, and put the Twinkie in his mouth. And for this guy, it was a transformative event. He hadn't been able to feed himself in 30 years or something, Buzz, the patient. And all of a sudden, here he was controlling robotic arms to do it through software and through an interface. So yeah, I think whether or not it's something that, it could be something Sheehan, again, like I said, was in a movie in the 70s or 80s, a Clint Eastwood movie, it was part of the lore because of Corso. So whether Sheehan's just picking through the lore and saying, hey, here's something cool that could exist, I don't know. But if it did exist, it would be consistent with the way we understand science and the way we understand brain signals, that you can interpret brain signals. And in the case of the guy driving the wheelchair, if you want to turn left, he would just think about moving his left arm. And since his left arm doesn't move, the chair would go left, right? And same with his right arm or whatever. So, yeah, it's technologically viable and something we're working on now.
It makes me think that Elon Musk really doesn't help himself, does he? Where you've got these organizations have paraplegics, tetraplegics, and people with disabilities helping themselves and have these experiences that we take for granted. And Elon Musk's got chimps playing Pong. So, sometimes you've got to just take a look at that, Elon, and, are you doing the right thing? One thing I want to know before we head off, Chris, you've been great with your time, and things changed so last minute for us,
Sure,
which was,
no
was
problem.
great to talk. Were there any articles you were trying to write in 2022 or leads you were chasing for exciting stories that just never quite came to fruition?
Yeah, so we get a lot of leads. One of the unique things about being at the debrief in the position we're in is scientists send me things, engineers send me things, UFO curious people send me things, and as well as to the main debrief account. And sometimes we get leads on video or UFO photos, something like that, or again, like a new piece of technology that's being developed secretly or something like that, and it doesn't pan out. So I'm trying to think if I have a great example of something, or sometimes, we did a report in May on, we call it the Border Patrol Bob story because that was the guy's name, but it was basically saying that the people who work the borders in the U.S., the Border Patrol, are seeing UFOs. They're seeing
I
UAP. And
remember the story, yeah.
yeah, and there were a number of reports in there of different incidents and different witness claims and stuff. But it had a really crappy piece of video to go with it that was probably just some birds, right? So, being the UFO community, everybody focused on the birds and maybe lost sight of the fact that not only is the Navy reporting they're seeing things, which is kind of what has spurred everything in the last few years to really gain steam, but the Border Patrol working with military planes, working with National Guard planes, using these advanced radar systems and advanced data gathering systems, are seeing things that they can't explain. That as Border Patrol Bob told us, he says, that's what I've been doing for 30 years. I've been looking at this stuff through radars and through cameras on these planes, and I'm seeing things that I go, I don't know what that is, and I can't explain it. So sometimes we get a story that we feel is significant, but if there's video or photo or something associated with it that's completely underwhelming, maybe we lose the story there. So that's probably, if I had a frustrating one from this last year, I will say I have a story I've been chasing down for over a year about a mainstream researcher who works in nuclear fusion, who, in their high energy experiments, had some, what he described to me as interesting results when it came to modifying gravity. And I said, are you talking about anti-gravity? And he says, yeah, so we're kind of loath to use that term, but we have some interesting results. And I said, well, can you give me an example? And he says, well, we have video where we're floating ping pong balls and floating pieces of wood. And again, like a mainstream college professor, scientist working on a big grant who works with NASA on nuclear fusion, but they work with really, really ultra high energy equipment. So because of that, they may have observed some interesting things when it relates to gravity. So they've been, because it wasn't part of what they were doing with their research, and this is kind of what happened with Sonny White with the warp bubble story I put out a year ago, because it was something discovered while they were working on other research, they can't quite make the stuff public yet. So I have yet to see these videos he claims to have. But it's a really straight shooter. It's not the type of guy that gets on the phone and makes something up.
Yeah.
The type of guy who was interviewing for a whole other story about his nuclear stuff. And at the end of the interview, he says, hey, can you turn off the microphone? And I said, sure. And he says, I got something really cool to tell you about that'll be a story for you guys in the next few months. Well, that was over a year ago when he told me about that. And I know that he's somebody I've talked to for other stories since, and we've talked to, and I'm still getting the, yeah, you will get it at some point. I'll be able to release that to you at some point. We will be doing a paper on it at some point. But he won't give me anything more. So
that's exciting.
Yeah, when I hear something like that and I go, what are the implications of that? High energy manipulating gravity. That starts really getting into well, maybe some UFOs are black projects, and maybe people in the power situations are keeping, maybe he's not allowed to talk about it, or maybe it's something that has been stumbled on before, or maybe it is brand new. Maybe he has stumbled onto something that hasn't been stumbled on before, but his team. So I would say that's the biggest carrot story I still haven't that I'm chasing. That there will be a point this year that if I don't get it from him, I will probably just write the story, and I will probably say, this is what I was told, this is what I've heard, and at this point he's unwilling to, or I can't get information or video. So
Sure.
there will be a point where I out this person and who they are and the projects they're working on, and I'll let the public decide. But yeah, and that's probably the biggest carrot I've been chasing that hasn't turned into a real story yet.
When you mentioned the videos from back in May that, like you say, were potentially more than likely going to be birds, but the actual bigger story was that they are seeing UAP on these border patrols, or UFOs on these border patrols. It makes me think, full circle back to the report being released today, that sometimes in this subject, less can be more. Because imagine we never knew about these reports. Imagine we never knew about the task force, AARO, the DOD involvement in the last couple of years. And imagine today that the debrief breaks a story that there have been a couple of reports out in the last few years. We get the reports as they've been released, but we had never seen them, never heard of them. The story would be huge. Oh, the DOD's investigating UFOs. Look at the people involved. There's case numbers. Pilots are reporting stuff. There would be huge excitement. And I think this comes back to what I think we are spoiled for what we do get. People absolutely are entitled to and should expect more and want more. That's the whole drive of the UFO subject and the story and the myth and the love of it. But again, I've always said, if you take a step back and look at the bigger timeline of history, we're living in an age where if you put pinpoints on the years and months of when things actually happened in the UFO topic, it'd be so sparse for decades. And you would hit 2017, 2018, and it's just bang, 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 bang. Sure, some of it turns out to be a bit of a damp squib, but I think we're living in a far more exciting time than people maybe give it credit for at the minute. And maybe in the fullness of time, these reports will be a bit more interesting or newsworthy than they maybe are at the moment.
I couldn't agree more, Andy. I tell people this all the time. I started following the UFO subject in 1977 when I had my own witness experience, and I was just before my 8th birthday. And ironically, a few months before Close Encounters and Star Wars hit the theaters. So it's been something I've been following forever. And we would go decades with nothing. Or if you got something, it was Bob Lazar, and it seemed real, and then you dug into it and went, maybe this, at least for my opinion, didn't really turn out to be anything there. And same thing like the Corso book, Day After Roswell, that would come out and be like, oh my God, we have a whistleblower, we have new information, and then it would fizzle away. The things that have happened in the last 5 years plus, a little over 5 years now, and the momentum, I tell people this all the time. We've been dreaming about NASA jumping in on this and putting their hat in the ring and looking for UFOs. We've been dreaming about a guy like Avi Loeb, a professor at Harvard, jumping in on this. We've been dreaming about all these things. We've been dreaming about, hey, ever since Project Blue Book ended in 1969, again, the year I was born, we went 50 years without the military at least openly acknowledging and studying this. And maybe, if the criticisms of Elizondo are right, maybe it was just a portfolio he carried around and it was a subset of OSWAP. And so maybe there really wasn't that much going on. But whatever that is, it's led to this now. This is real. The AARO is a real organization within the DOD who's actively talking to all these different organizations saying, give us your reports, give us your data. We're going to try and make heads or tails of this whole thing. So what has happened in the last few years, in the last couple of years? I mean, Ryan Graves is running this whole group for the AIAA that's about aviation safety in UFOs, and they're doing their own efforts now. The FAA is working on ways for people to report that. We may have whistleblower legislation in place now. I mean, anyone, as you point out, any one of these would have carried us for years, would have carried people that were curious about UFOs and wanted to know what was going on and what people like me were seeing in the sky that we couldn't explain. Any one of these. So, yes, I think we get overloaded with tons of great stuff, but none of it giving us exactly that one magic thing we want, which is an answer. Even if the answer is it's secret tech that the US and the UK have been working on together since before Calvin, and they just didn't want to let anyone know because we haven't faced an existential war since World War II. So we've just kind of been keeping this secret weapon in the back pocket since the late 40s and developing it. Whatever or it's atmospheric phenomenon. They're all Hesdelin lights and they just shape themselves like saucers and look like craft, or shape themselves like a tic tac and look like a craft, but are really just some natural occurrence. Whatever the answer is, I think that's the main frustration will continue to be. We're getting more information, we're getting more activity, we still feel like we're short on answers.
Chris, you're never short on an answer, which is always good when I'm speaking to you. If people have enjoyed listening to this, they can check out our previous interview where we go into a bit on your background and things as well. And obviously all your links will be down below. We've already covered with Chris some of the things he's working on, and look out for those new articles dropping in a couple of weeks' time as well on Chicago O'Hare. Chris, always a pleasure speaking to you, and I look forward to doing so again in the near future.
Thanks for having me on, Andy. It's always fun.
That is all for this week's show. Thank you very much for listening. Please remember to leave the podcast a review on your chosen platform. You can like, retweet and subscribe. That would all be very much appreciated. The shows are being uploaded onto YouTube as we speak more and more. You can sign up at patreon.com/That UFO Podcast to access the shows ad-free as well. Please get in touch on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, That UFO Podcast. Of course, on Twitter, it's at UFO UAPAM. And again, folks, as always, keep looking up. You never know what you might see.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little Baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue. I don't think he expected me to see his ass, but I'd had some champagne and smoked a little around. Meditative game of state full on meta. I can't imagine how it could have been any better. I got to the top of the stairs and there he was. Like, you awake? I was about to abduct you, cuz. I jumped back and nearly kissed myself, and I climbed out the window after the elf, and I woke up in my bed and there was something on my head and everything was weird and everything was red. And I called out to my boys. They thought this was noise. They thought it was a dream. They thought it was my toys. They thought it was my problems, and they think I should seek therapy, and I don't know what to do because it doesn't really scare me. If you really want to know who I think I be, I think it's you and me and us and we and him and her and that and she and that thing over there and what's that, Jake? If we're being serious, open your mind, consider your heart, consider time, consider your space, consider your lies, consider your life, consider your eyes. It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer.
What's that in the class with you that sonic boom? Got sleep around 6 and goblins in my room.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer.
What's that in the class with you that sonic boom? Got sleep around 6 and goblins in my room.